The studio lights were warm, almost too warm, as Morgan Freeman settled into the chair across from Jennifer Hudson, his calm presence instantly shifting the energy of the room. The audience erupted into applause the moment he appeared, some standing, others whispering in awe, as if they were witnessing a living monument rather than a man. Morgan acknowledged them with a gentle nod, that familiar half-smile resting easily on his face. Jennifer beamed, clearly honored, her voice bright as she welcomed him and spoke about his decades-long career, his unmistakable voice, and the wisdom he seemed to carry wherever he went. At first, the exchange felt effortless, two artists reflecting on resilience, storytelling, and the responsibility that comes with influence. Morgan spoke slowly, deliberately, choosing each word as if it mattered deeply, not just to him but to everyone listening. He talked about aging in Hollywood, about silence being just as powerful as dialogue, about how stories could heal or divide depending on how they were told. The audience hung onto every syllable. Jennifer nodded along, occasionally laughing, occasionally leaning forward, visibly engaged. It was the kind of interview that producers dream of, intimate, thoughtful, and magnetic. Then Jennifer shifted slightly in her chair, her smile softening into something more serious. She mentioned a recent headline that had sparked debate online, one in which Morgan's name had been pulled into a larger cultural argument. She framed the question gently at first, emphasizing context and misunderstanding, asking him to clarify what he had meant. Morgan chuckled quietly, waving a hand as if brushing off dust. He responded with grace, explaining that quotes often lose their soul when removed from the conversations they're born in. The audience murmured in agreement, a few people clapping. But Jennifer didn't let it rest there. She rephrased the question, this time referencing specific reactions and critics who felt disappointed, even hurt. Her tone remained respectful, but the words carried more weight now. Morgan's smile faded just slightly, not into anger, but into something more guarded. His posture changed, still relaxed, yet alert. He paused longer before answering, the silence stretching just enough for discomfort to creep in. He explained that he had lived long enough to see ideas rise, fall, and return wearing different names. He spoke about intention versus perception, about how people sometimes hear what they're already prepared to believe. His voice stayed calm, but there was an unmistakable firmness beneath it. Jennifer listened, nodding, but then challenged one point, suggesting that public figures don't get the luxury of separating intent from impact. A ripple passed through the crowd. The atmosphere, once warm and intimate, tightened. Morgan leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped. He reminded her, politely but pointedly, that conversation should invite understanding, not judgment. Jennifer responded just as carefully, saying her role was to ask the questions people at home were already asking. The exchange remained civil, yet the tension was undeniable, like a low hum beneath the dialogue. Even the band behind them sat unusually still. As Morgan continued, his words grew more personal. He spoke about being reduced to soundbites after a lifetime of nuance, about how exhausting it was to constantly defend oneself against narratives shaped by strangers. His eyes scanned the audience, not accusing, but searching. Some faces reflected sympathy, others looked uncertain. Jennifer shifted again, glancing briefly toward the cameras before returning her gaze to him, trying to regain balance without backing down. The studio felt smaller now, the lights harsher. Producers whispered urgently behind the scenes. Morgan finished his thought with a quiet insistence that respect must be mutual, that dialogue should never feel like a trap. The applause that followed was scattered, hesitant, unsure whether it was appropriate. Jennifer inhaled, preparing to respond, sensing the moment teetering on the edge of something bigger than an interview. Jennifer inhaled slowly, the kind of breath performers take when they know they are standing at the edge of something volatile. She thanked Morgan for his honesty, her voice steady but quieter now, and attempted to pivot the conversation back toward his upcoming project. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the tension might dissolve, that the audience could be guided back into safer territory. Morgan nodded, offering a polite smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. The shift had already happened, and everyone in the room could feel it. The interview was no longer just an exchange of words, it had become a test of boundaries. As Jennifer began her next question, Morgan gently raised a hand, asking to finish his previous thought. The gesture was calm, respectful, but final. He spoke about dignity, about how platforms meant for celebration can sometimes turn into arenas without warning. He clarified that he wasn't afraid of hard questions, but he was wary of questions framed by outrage rather than curiosity. His voice remained low and measured, yet each sentence landed with weight. The audience was silent now, not even murmuring, as if afraid to disturb the moment. Jennifer responded carefully, explaining that difficult conversations were part of the responsibility of hosting, especially in a time when audiences demanded transparency. She emphasized that her intention was never to ambush him, only to give him space to address what people were already debating. Her words were sincere, but Morgan shook his head slightly. He said intention didn't always erase impact, echoing her earlier point, but turning it back toward the structure of the show itself. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. A producer's voice crackled faintly through Jennifer's earpiece, urging her to wrap it up. She hesitated, caught between following instructions and honoring the gravity of what was unfolding. Morgan noticed the pause. He straightened in his chair, smoothing the front of his jacket, a subtle signal that he was preparing to leave. When he stood, the movement felt seismic, as if the ground itself had shifted beneath the set. Jennifer rose too, instinctively, reaching out with a conciliatory smile. She thanked him again, hoping to salvage the moment, to close it with grace. Morgan turned toward the audience instead, thanking them for their time and attention. He said he believed in conversation, but only when it allowed room for humanity on all sides. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added that sometimes walking away was the only way to keep one's voice intact. Stage managers appeared at the edges of the set, their expressions tight but professional. The band remained silent. A few audience members began to clap, unsure at first, then louder, a mix of admiration and disbelief. Others stayed frozen, hands in their laps, eyes darting between Jennifer and Morgan. As he moved toward the exit, cameras struggled to follow, unsure whether to stay wide or cut away. Jennifer stood center stage, composed but visibly shaken, her hands clasped together as if grounding herself. The show cut to an early commercial, but the moment had already escaped the confines of the studio. Within minutes, clips began circulating online, dissected frame by frame. Some praised Morgan for setting boundaries, calling his exit a powerful stand against performative confrontation. Others criticized him, arguing that public figures should expect scrutiny and discomfort. Jennifer, too, became a focal point, defended by some as a journalist doing her job, questioned by others for pushing too hard. Back in the emptying studio, the warmth was gone. Crew members whispered, replaying the exchange in their minds, wondering where exactly the line had been crossed, or if it ever had been. Jennifer returned to her seat during the break, staring down at her notes, the words suddenly meaningless. She knew the interview would be remembered, not for what was said at the beginning, but for how it ended. By the time the episode finished airing, the narrative had already splintered into countless interpretations. But one thing was clear. What began as a celebration had transformed into a moment that forced everyone watching to confront the fragile balance between asking hard questions and honoring the people answering them. And long after the lights dimmed and the applause faded, that unresolved tension lingered, echoing far beyond the studio walls.